Okay, so first is going to be Sparks and his duo Tripsy. We're going to watch each team and point out the good and bad things as to what they're doing well, what they could improve upon in order to reach that top 100, top 50 players within the world. Now, we see some solid quality play from these guys, but ultimately the struggles come down to a few minor errors, and those could be fixed and improved. Now, the first major error seems like it may not be that big a deal, but timing is everything. You don't get that much time realistically in Fortnite, so everything needs to be with a purpose. These two are looting, and they take a while to loot. They don't wind up leaving until much later than they should. Ultimately, your goal while looting should be leaving your looting path and focusing on rotates, maybe even a little bit of farming on the way after the first zone closes or right before the first zone starts to close. So you see that timer. Once that timer hits 0 in the bottom right corner, that's when you should have an idea of when I'm leaving. This is also another mistake that gets made. Instead of rotating on the northern side, these guys choose to go right outside of Coney, which we know is going to be a blimp location. You want to avoid these blimp locations whenever possible, and it definitely was possible to go up to the north a little bit. These guys are going to get held here, and had the team wanted to, they could have held them for much longer and been a real big pain in the butt for these two. Luckily, after first zone shows or second zone shows, the players on the blimp begin to move and ultimately allow these two not to get held for too long, but this could have been a problem, and this is what you need to avoid. I said I would point out the good and bad, so this car rotate is one of the good things that I like from them. Using vehicles to rotate in mid-game is very important. The only thing I don't like is them going through all these valleys, putting themselves in low points, and not really being able to force a good position and good vision. They could have taken the car, gone on the same path, and then put themselves in a better position. They don't really get shot at or anything, and then ultimately decide to base here, which in my opinion is not the best space to be. You're a little below, you don't really have a ton of vision, and you could have gotten yourself a little further into this zone. Let's even just say this position with better vision and more towards the center of zone. Now, this is the last piece I want to talk about because this seems to be a fairly big problem for mid to higher level players. We'll watch this end game and it just seems to be all over the place. There isn't like a solid plan as to where these guys want to be and how they want to play it. It just seems like a lot of builds are spent. We start off on the right foot, but then these two don't necessarily continue to play as they should. And there's just builds being placed, tarps being all over, and we don't necessarily seem to have a fluid motion and plan while we're moving through these zones. And this happens again in the rest of the zones. There are some times where it looks clean, and we do see that happen right here, but ultimately the issue is just not a solid fluid motion, and this comes down to practice, and more practice playing end games, because if you're not comfortable playing end games, then you're going to run into these issues where you're just placing a ton of builds and not putting yourself in good positions in these end games. Next up, we got Culture, or Culture 1X. He's playing with Antoine. These guys look like they're trying to land chonkers and then wind up bailing. One of the pieces of advice that I would tell to literally anyone is if you want to be one of the top 100 players, you have to be able to own a POI. And I see this all too often where players are just going to bail out of a POI. They do get bailed out because there's a llama here, but just trying to grab some shambles loot is not going to allow you to consistently succeed. So your goal should be to own, know, and just dominate a single POI. And do this every single time that you play, regardless of when it is. This is a good adjustment by these guys. Ultimately, they do get a llama and survive. Now, this next piece is kind of small, but it's really important, especially when you're playing against better players. They will quickly recognize that you're separated and jump on you. These two guys made a play, Habibi and Antoine, to get an elim here. And then Dark and Chaos are right nearby. Antoine is all by himself. They could jump on him and ultimately get a free elim. They don't, but you need to be near your teammate almost at all times unless you're 100% confident that there's no one nearby. Now, the second zone rotate kind of confused me because I didn't understand the goal. We see where they're at right now, like easily could stay in this position. We're right here. for this white team. And they just keep going. I don't understand what the purpose of this is. We wind up getting shot. We continue to move into zone. And then they just base in a position that's not really going to give them too much knowledge or information of what's going on in the zone. And also going to limit them from any surge opportunities or tags from players rotating. Because right now we're just sitting in a hole. This is something we saw last game. Not necessarily the worst if you're really strong on surge and you just want to chill. But also, you don't have any information as to what the rest of the zone's looking like because it's on the other side of this hill. Basing up on this hill is definitely the play. In this endgame, they're going to use this car a bunch of times, and I really like this. We've seen cars become more and more dominant throughout the rest of the season because of the lack of other movement. So these guys are able to use this car. They're going to use it once again in 6 zone, and they're just generally using this to be able to get almost 2 free rotates. Works really, really well. Once they do get out of the car, the tarps here by Culture are really solid. He uses wood quickly to get rid of some of it and then moves on to all the hard materials. That way he's able to get themselves a solid base once they start to get near the first moving zone's final position. They do a good job of trading materials. The only problem, they get a little carried away and don't necessarily pay attention to what's going on while they're trading over materials, but ultimately doesn't hurt them. The one thing that I would say is Antoine does a good job here of taking over the tarp while his teammates healing. What you do need to be careful of, and what I've noticed watching these guys during endgame, is they don't do a good job of being proactive getting refreshes. A lot of the time they're just tarping, which is fine for a little while, but as a duo, especially with the extended end games last season, you need to be able to get refreshes consistently, and if you're not creating opportunities for them, you're not going to be able to get them. And we even see right here, he's looking at a player that was on the left side of his wall. That could have been a play, but instead they choose not to and just continue tarping. And last but not least, we have EDI, or Coach Eddy. Him and his duo Neppy have landed a split. They basically took like this whole area out here and all this good stuff. They're uncon. We don't really need to talk about off spawn because really all they've done is shot 1 or 2 people, but let's see what they do and what we can learn from them. So again, like I've noted in the past, good use of the vehicle rotates. Really like that this season. I think it's vital. You have to use the vehicles. Let's see where they decide to base up in second zone. Making a little dead side rotate here, putting themselves a good position in spawn. They're taking a hill, trying to grab a solid spot. They still have their car too, and they're trying to save it. And for the first time, this is something that we will probably see more of as this season goes on. The use of the repair torch and able to save your vehicles. Really smart play by these two to hold that. And we see they're also holding Harpoon to get refreshes. So this is the first time I've really seen this loadout composition out of the 3. And this tells me that this team has thought through and already started to learn different pieces of this season. Another thing that I like that this team has done better is we see that where they are in this position, they can pretty much see the entirety of this zone. It goes up to this hill. This is going to be about the far edge of zone, maybe a little further. There's going to be teams back there, but they can see the majority of the players in this lobby and then build their strategy based around that. Here's a piece where you could throw your game, and I don't think most players realize it. See, they're already starting to get shot at, and players are looking for surge. See, clearly these guys need some damage. We can see the players we're watching are above, but likely the players down below are not. So EDI and Neppy trying to make a play here. I'm very hesitant to make this edit down below, even give these guys the opportunity, weaken your edits, because we know they're already trying to shoot at you. And say other teams were more desperate. Let's say there was like 8 teams above or 8 teams below surge. This could wind up getting you focused. So normally I'd say this positioning is absolutely terrible. We're down in the valley. If we look at where we're at, there's just mountains on all sides of us, these players being right down below us. But because they have the car with the chonker tires, it's going to be able to scale the mountains. So I don't necessarily find this position as bad as I would say you don't have a vehicle with chonkers tires. And this is such a solid rotate to be able to make this while just playing moving zones, to be able to take a vehicle and just go straight up. Granted, the vehicle is not working exactly the way they want to, but say you were able to navigate it better, you would be in a good spot. I think that's one of the learning curves that we'll have to figure out, is how much can you push a chonker tire car. And these guys decided that was going to be all they're comfortable pushing it with, and then they tarp in, give themselves some space to play off of. I think this team is playing very well together. We can see they have a clear focus on specific elements of the game when they're trying to make plays or do something. The one piece that I think they're missing is creating opportunities for refreshes, and I think that's been a common theme across everyone. So finding players on or near your layer that you can pressure is something that you need to be able to do on a regular basis. We see them doing this now, but unfortunately it's going to be much more difficult to do this when you have no materials to make a play off of versus when you have some mats. And we do see that there's now going to be a player above them they could have made a play on. And multiple opportunities will come throughout the game. One of the best players that I see do this is Scented and Cold. I have a whole end game analysis of them. I would suggest checking that out. It's actually from last season, but they do such a good job of just like constantly breaking down players, finding them, and removing them from the lobby and taking all their mats. So that's that. I do see some success from this team, but it could be a little bit better, and I believe that with a little bit more practice, this team will be able to find more refreshes, getting themselves in rhythms and playing better.